I apologize that I had to do this in two parts. The my camera doesn't have a lot of memory left on it, and my computer camera isn't working. So I'm recording this on my phone, and it also doesn't have much memory. So it cut me off after about 6 minutes. So I'm going to try and get through this in just 2 clips here. But we were going through the scriptures that talked about wolves in the Bible. So we went through the ones in the Gospels talking about, I'm sending you out as lambs among wolves. And the last one that we find in scripture, the last reference to wolves that we find in scripture is in Acts chapter 20, verse 29. And this time it is Paul, and Paul's in Ephesus, and he's been traveling a lot. He's not in Ephesus for very long. He knows he needs to go to Jerusalem. Probably there's going to be persecution that happens there, but he knows that he needs to go, has some mixed feelings about the whole thing. And he's letting the people in Ephesus know that there will be some that will rise up from within. And so what it actually says is, I know that false teachers like vicious wolves will come in among you after I leave you, not sparing the flock. So this paints a picture of shepherds coming up within. So this isn't even an external threat. This isn't another country coming in vicious as wolves. This is from within the Ephesian people themselves, within the church at Ephesus. There is a rising up. There will be a rising up of wolves, of people who are vicious, of people who want to destroy. And it says that they will destroy by distorting the truth. So what do we do? What do we do with these wolves? I mean, this sounds like a big threat, right? With a giant, we're looking at intimidation. We're looking at, sometimes we fight them through miraculous strength and energy, and other times we grab our community and we let our community fight with us, or sometimes even for us. With foxes, we focus on the mission. We know what we're doing. We focus there. What in the world do we do with wolves? And doesn't that feel real for today with the terrorist attacks and everything that's been going on? What do we do with wolves? We can't always predict a wolf early on. We can't predict who's coming in. And yeah, I know there's lots of crazy talk about things we can do. And there are some realistic, practical things that can happen from a view of national security and government and stuff. But that aside, as Christian people, what do we do? How do we be good shepherds and look out for wolves? Because according to scripture, wolves are vicious. They will destroy, they will distort the truth, and they will often rise up from within. We know from scripture that they rise up in a place of lack of leadership. The less strong quality leadership you have that is speaking truth, that is pastoring, the more likely we are to have wolves. So we know that one thing we can do to protect against wolves is to make sure that our leaders are equipped, that they're strong, and that they know truth, right? We want our leaders grounded in biblical truth so that they can stand, right? And then they can spread that truth to those that they're leading, okay? But what else can we do? How do we know? What do we do here? Well, the passage in Matthew, the one in Matthew chapter 7, if you read that whole chapter, the entire chapter of Matthew 7, you'll find that you'll know the tree by its fruit. Interesting that that's in that same chapter where Jesus warns about the wolves, right? We'll be known by our fruit. And it's in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, where we're told, if the fruit of the Spirit is, I'm going to read them. Sometimes I remember all 9, sometimes I don't. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If those things are missing in your leaders, in those that are coming into your community, you might have a wolf in sheep's clothing. And you may have, you may have to look at things. You may have to decide, is this possibly a wolf? Now, I think we all know that none of us are perfect, and none of us have all 9 of the fruit of the Spirit active in our life in this beautiful, abundant measure all of the time, right? It's a growth process. So sometimes we have to watch people for a while. We have to see, do I see this fruit in their life? And if not, maybe it's a little bit of the fruit, right? Do I see it a little bit more every week, every month, every year? Do I feel like the Spirit is doing things in their life that promote those things. For people who are saying they're prophets and they're giving prophetic words, do those words pass the test? Do they show love, peace, patience, joy, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, kindness, self-control? Like, do those things reap in the words of our leadership? Do we hear those things in the words of our leadership? Do we see in the actions of our leadership the fruit of the Spirit, right? We want that produced in our leadership, and we want to look at our sheep and make sure that they understand that that's fruit of the Spirit, that they can look at one another, we can look at one another and know, is this a wolf in sheep's clothing? Is this someone who's going to come and try and destroy the flock? Well, if they're not showing fruit of the Spirit, that's a good sign, right? There's another sign in, I think it's 1 John, where it talks about testing of the spirits. It's either 1 John or 1 Peter. And it mentions that any spirit that does not declare that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is the Son of God, you want to watch out for that, right? Probably what they're telling you is not true. So that's another test, that when we're looking at our faith communities, we can know that someone that comes from outside that seems to be very helpful and yet can't declare that Jesus is Lord. Maybe there's someone to watch out for, right? But the number one thing that we're not allowed to do, my pastor, some of you know him, Jordan Sang, will always say there's an exclusive virtue. There's one virtue that the Bible tells us is reserved for God and God alone, and that is fear. We are to fear nothing but God himself. So anything that when we face a wolf, when we face a giant, when we face foxes, next time we'll talk about flies, when we face any of these things that could affect our mission, we are not allowed to be afraid. We should never be afraid of the wolves. He who is in us is so much greater than he who is in the world. We do not fear. We do not fear. And when we feel fear starting to build in our lives, we want to remember that the scripture has the remedy for fear, and I may have mentioned it on these videos before. Perfect love casts out all fear. When in doubt, go to that place where you are pursuing perfect love. Fear will flee, wisdom will come. And wisdom is what we really need when we're trying to protect the flock from the sheep. We want leaders. We want to make sure that we've got leaders. We're training them well and they're equipped. They've got a good biblical solid foundation. We look at the fruit. We do judge based on fruit. Doesn't mean we reject people, but we might not put them in leadership, right? We might not put someone who's not showing fruit in a place where they can easily destroy others. Probably not a good idea, right? Probably not wisdom. We want to make sure that they can acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Son of God, right? The creator of the universe. And we also want to make sure that nothing we're doing is being motivated by fear. We have nothing to fear. If we are taken captive, flogged, beaten, and taken before the courts, Jesus himself was executed. We're not allowed to be afraid. Somehow we have to find our peace. And in the midst of that peace, the Spirit will speak and tell us what to say. He will guide us. He will be faithful. All right, that's our talk on wolves. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back soon to talk about flies. Thanks.